The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. On that day, Jesus went out of the house and sat down by the sea. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat down, and the whole crowd stood along the shore. And he spoke to them at length in parables, saying, A sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seed fell on the path, and birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky ground, where it had little soil. It sprang up at once, because the soil was not deep. And when the sun rose, it was scorched, and it was withered for lack of roots. Some seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it. But some seed fell on rich soil and produced fruit 100 or 60 or 30-fold. Whoever has ears ought to hear. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Good morning, everyone. That gospel parable should sound familiar to most of us. We probably heard it at Bible school or in religion classes since the time we were little children. The parable of the sower and the seed. The translation which I just read came from Matthew chapter 13, but we also find this parable almost verbatim in Mark chapter 4 and Luke chapter 8. John doesn't know anything about this parable. And all I can say to you, the first time I read it and each time I read it, I have to chuckle inside. Because if I had planted seeds on our farm growing up, with my grandfather as the supervisor, the way this farmer planted his seeds, my grandfather would have throttled me. He was very, very serious about wasting nothing, and that's why I'm almost obsessed at times with making sure that light switches are turned off and faucets don't leak and so on and so on. But when it came to planting, he expected me to plant rows and to put seeds in those rows perfectly, and then we covered up the soil so as not to waste the seeds. But look what this farmer did. It's incredible. Jesus says this farmer went out to sow one day, and he just took seeds and he flung them everywhere. Some seed fell on rocky soil. There was no way there was soil underneath it so it could even take root, so it just withered up from the hot sun. Some seed fell among thorns, and as the little plant grew up, the thorns choked it off and it died. But some seed, says Jesus, some seed fell on good soil and produced a yield 30, 60, or 100-fold. But it's an amazing story. And I have to tell you, I studied Palestinian farming techniques back at the time of Jesus, and that's exactly what they did. Now, it doesn't make any sense to us today, but that's how they did it. The farmer just flung seeds everywhere, and someone came behind him and turned the ground over, and that's how it was. But what extravagance and waste. But you know, life is like that a lot, isn't it? You put out good efforts at doing the right thing, and very often you get little to no results. You put energy into something, and you get very little or no return at all. When you look at life, a lot of times we can be very extravagant in our efforts. We waste even at times. But we get no return. And you know, the Bible is replete with examples of such things. For instance, in Matthew's Gospel, we're told that a little baby is born in a town called Bethlehem. He's born in abject poverty and in a land that was stricken with poverty. But yet no sooner than he takes his first few breaths, Magi from the east come bringing gold, frankincense, myrrh, luxurious, extravagant gifts for this little poverty-stricken baby. And then not too long after this baby's alive, we're told in Matthew chapter 2 that the king of the area, King Herod, hearing from some people that the newborn king of the Jews has been born, gets paranoid. He consults his religious authorities to find out exactly where this kid is located, but to no avail. They are clueless. And so what does he do? In a very vicious act, he orders all the firstborn children of the house of Israel to be slaughtered. Hundreds are butchered within a period of a week because of one little baby. And that's not all. The baby would grow up to be an adult, and he would preach. He would sow seeds with his words. Great crowds followed him. In fact, one time we know that there was 5,000 that followed him once. But only 12 would join him. And those 12 initially were klutzes. One was an outright betrayer. One denied him. And none of them were around when he was hanging, suffering on the cross. What a waste. And then he even talked about wasteful things. It's really amazing. If you go to the Gospels, he tells a story about a shepherd, you see. This shepherd has 100 sheep, which meant that this shepherd was in pretty good shape financially. One of the sheep goes off astray. What does this farmer do? Not what a good business person would do. Just figure the thing's going to get eaten by a wolf or be picked up by robbers. It's gone. You write it off as a loss. That's all there is to it. No, says Jesus. This farmer leaves the 99 sheep unprotected to go after the one lost stray. And in Luke chapter 15, he even adds even more to the detail that makes no sense. The guy finds the dirty, smelly little thing, and he puts it on his shoulder in jubilation and carries it back home. I would have been booting that thing all the way home. And then he tells a story about a man, a Jewish man, who falls among robbers. They beat him, they rob him, they leave him for dead. Two is his fellow Jews, one a priest, one a Levi, come by and see him, and they don't want to waste their effort because he's probably already dead. We don't know for sure. But we're told a non-Jew, in fact an outcast, a hated, despised Samaritan comes by. Not only does he pick him up and clean his wounds, he takes him on his own beast of burden to the nearest inn and empties his pockets of every nickel that he has and says to the innkeeper, you spend whatever you have to do to bring him back to health. And if it's more than what I put on the table, I'll come back and pay you all. It doesn't matter. You just do what you have to do to spare this man's life. What an incredible, extravagant waste for somebody who hated you to begin with. Doesn't make any sense, does it? Well, my brothers and sisters, that's how it is, it seems, in this life. Like the farmer who goes out and throws seeds everywhere only to have some of those seeds, a small number, produce a harvest. He still keeps a pitching. But you know, in the real world, we see that all the time. You know, for instance, I've been to many. I've just got through doing my 537th career wedding, and I've got a gray hair or lack of hair for each of them, I can assure you. People put so much money and energy into creating the perfect wedding. I have seen weddings that would rival the wedding of Prince William and Catherine, only to have that wedding fall apart in divorce several years later. I remember one time up in Wheeling, probably the most lavish wedding I'd ever experienced. I wouldn't find out till sometime later from one of the staff members that just what the family spent inside the church to pull off this wedding was in excess of $100,000. They're divorced today. Amazing, isn't it? And you parents and grandparents know this storyline all so well. You know, you sow the seeds of good parenting patiently and lovingly and firmly, only to have the birds of drugs and the secular media come by and peck away at your efforts each and every day. You sow good seed, but the birds ate it up. Or you sow the seeds of faith in your children. You bring them to church. You put them in a Catholic school at great expense and sacrifice, only to have them grow up as young adults and leave the Catholic Church. And then, we'll talk about extravagance. One of the crown jewels of the city of Huntington, if not the crown jewel, is Hospice House. How many of you have ever been into Hospice House here in Huntington? You must go. You can get a tour. Our parishioner, Charlene Farrell, is the CEO of that place. The homes, the rooms inside that facility would rival the finest homes in the city of Huntington. It is luxurious, luxurious. Why? For a bunch of people who are dying, for people who are coming to the end of their life. We had one man in there this week for 24 hours from our sister parish at St. Stephen's. That's all he lasted. But you know what? When he went into the room, he was fully conscious, and he could not believe how luxurious his room was. But why so much expense for someone who's coming to the end of life's journey? You know, that's just how it is in this life, though. You know, teachers know this story all the time. You sow good seeds of teaching, that little darling that you've been instructing and disciplining and trying to help along the way doesn't appear to produce any time under your watch. But maybe down the road, something will happen. But you know, our Lord is like that. Whenever he gives us, whenever he sows his seeds to us, when he gives us his grace and his word, he gives us the best because he wants our salvation. The question is, how do we accept it or not accept it? Are we responsive to his word? He continues to sow seeds constantly in us. I'd like to share with you a story discovered recently, and I did do some research to make sure that it was an authentic story, and it in fact is. This story illustrates what the Lord does and what he's thinking. Several years ago, a baby boy was born in a Milwaukee hospital. The baby was blind, mentally retarded, and had cerebral palsy. He was little more than a vegetable who didn't respond to sound or touch. His parents had abandoned him. The hospital didn't know what to do with the little baby. Then someone remembered May Lemke, a 52-year-old nurse who lived nearby. She had raised 5 children of her own. She would know how to care for such a baby. They asked May to take the infant, saying, "He'll probably die fairly soon." May responded, "If I take that baby, he won't die, and I'll be happy to take him." May called the baby Leslie. It was not easy to care for him. Every day she massaged the baby's entire body. She prayed over him. She cried over him. She placed his hands in her tears. One day someone said to her, "Why don't you just put that child in an institution? You're wasting your life." As Leslie grew, so did May's problems. She had to keep him tied in a chair to keep him from falling over. Then the years passed. 5, 10, 15. It wasn't until Leslie was 16 years old that May was able to teach him to stand alone. All this time, he didn't respond to her. But all this time, May, wastefully, so to speak, continued to love him and to pray over him. She even told him stories of Jesus, though he didn't seem to hear her. Then one day, May noticed Leslie's finger plucking a taut string on a package. She wondered what this might mean. Was it possible Leslie was sensitive to music? May began to surround Leslie with music. She played every type of music imaginable, hoping that one type might appeal to him. Eventually, May and her husband bought an old second-hand piano. They put it in Leslie's bedroom. May took Leslie's fingers in hers and showed him how to push the keys down, but he didn't seem to understand. Then one winter night, May awoke to the sound of someone playing Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 1. She shook her husband, woke him up, and asked him if he had left the radio on. He said he didn't think so, but they decided they'd better check. What they discovered was beyond their wildest dreams. Leslie was sitting at the piano. He was smiling and playing it by ear. It was too remarkable to be true. Leslie had never gotten out of bed alone before. He had never seated himself at the piano before. He'd never struck a piano key on his own. Now he was playing beautifully. May dropped to her knees and said, "Thank you, dear God. You didn't forget Leslie." Soon Leslie began to live at the piano. He played classical, country and western, ragtime, gospel, and even rock. It was absolutely incredible. All the music May had played for him was stored in his brain and was now flowing out through his hands into the piano. Doctors described Leslie as an autistic savant, a person who is mentally retarded from brain damage, but extremely talented. They can't explain this unusual phenomenon, although they have known about it for nearly 200 years. I thought about this lady over here when I was reading this story initially. Jeannie Kalanick works with autistic students. That's a true story. Someone told me last night coming out of church they actually had a special on 60 Minutes, and the story goes even further. He now actually performs concerts for charitable fundraisers. They were going to throw him away. They were going to give him up. Look what happened. May served good seeds. I'd like to share with you something that happened this past week. Most of you know that I'm celebrating my 25th anniversary as a priest. And finally, on Monday, the 4th of July, I actually got 3 hours of interrupted time to open cards that you all sent. Thank you for the cards. And the cards have come in from a lot of different places, and some of them had very, very wonderful and touching notes inside. But there's one card out of all of them that really made me pause and think. I opened up the card. It was from Wheeling. And it was from a man that I know through my years up there as a pastor. For those of you who aren't aware, I was pastor of the largest Catholic church in the state for 20 years up north in Wheeling, a town in the northern panhandle. And I remember somewhere along the line, about 5 or 7 years into my pastorship up there, the guy stopped speaking to me, basically. Actually, what he did was he had what I call a turned lip syndrome. You know, when people get upset with me, sometimes they turn their lip up when they walk by. You know, or they have the blank stare look. You know, they'll walk by, they might even shake your hand coming into the church, and they look right through you as they go on. They're upset with you, and they never tell you why necessarily. But listen what this guy wrote in this card. Dear Father Jim, congratulations on your 25 years of service as a Catholic priest. He said, most of those years I've been very upset with you, and I never told you why. He said, a number of years ago, you did my wife and I's 50th wedding anniversary renewal of vows at the church on a Saturday evening. And I can remember it as clear as if it was happening right now. They had been married 50 years. They had a fairly good-sized family. And he said, we'd invited you to come to the reception after at Ogilvy Park, but you never showed up. And he said, just recently, I was talking to a gentleman about that. Now, this is about 20 years later. I was just talking to a gentleman about that, and he said, oh, Father Jim doesn't go to receptions like that. That's not his custom, so you shouldn't be upset with Father Jim. So he said, now, Father Jim, after all these years, I understand, and I accept you're not coming. God bless you. Have a good life. Well, unfortunately, nobody probably in this room likes to party like Father Jim. You give me a medium rare piece of prime rib and a couple glasses of Pinot Grigio, and I'll dance for you. I couldn't remember why I did not go to that reception at Ogilvy. So I keep my date books, my calendar books. It's unbelievable, but I've kept them through all these years. And I notate things that happened throughout the day, calls that I took out, and so on and so on. Well, I went and I looked up at those books, and I found that date, that Saturday in July. And what had happened after that Mass, it all came back to me. I went over the directory in order to get ready to go to Ogilvy for their reception, only to have the secretary tell me that a young mother in our parish had just delivered a stillborn baby. They wanted me at the hospital immediately. I remember thinking to myself, I could have blown it off kind of, sort of, and maybe gone up to Ogilvy for an hour or so and then go take care of this baby. After all, I'm not Jesus. I couldn't raise this baby from the dead. But you know what? That mother and that baby took precedence at that moment. And if I had to do all over again, I would do it again. Yes, it would have been a lot more fun going up to Ogilvy, partying with the upper class of society, instead of going to a hospital room and watching a mother grief-stricken holding her little dead newborn baby. But you know what? The more I thought about this story, the more I thought about John's card to me, I thought to myself, you know, what are you going to do to respond? How are you going to deal with this? The temptation came to write him a card back and saying, oh, well, just so you know, Mr. Know-it-all, I wasn't trying to, maintain my custom of not going to receptions. Actually, there was a little dead baby I had to take care of. But you know what? The way I look at it is this. It's like the parable of the sower. You know, you sow these seeds, you don't know where they go to, you don't know how they're going to grow up, but you sow the seeds. And you know, for many years, John heard me preach sermons about the parable of the sower. He heard me talk many years about forgiveness and overlooking injustices and hurts that we have. He heard me talk many times and give workshops about the need to forgive and to let go of pain so it doesn't affect your spiritual life or your health. He heard all of that. And so what? It took 20 years for it to finally take root, kind of, sort of. But that's how it is in the kingdom of God, you see. A number of years I had in an RCIA class, that's a class I teach for people who are interested in the Catholic Church. I had a teacher, actually she was a teacher of teachers. She had been a professor of education for a number of years at a college up north. A very wise woman, a woman actually of few words, but I remember one day we were sitting around talking, and she said, you know, Father Jim, teaching, as I tell these teachers, is a lot like sowing seeds. You know, you plant those seeds, but you needn't be concerned about the harvest. You may never live to see the harvest. Your job is to plant good seeds. And my brothers and sisters, that's the message for us today. Jesus plants great seeds, seeds of eternal life in each of every one of us. How will we respond? We are called to be sowers of the seed, to live our faith, to share our faith in an extravagant manner. What will the harvest be like? Well, that's God's concern.